The Dirty Life, a memoir of farming, food, and love. One of the first books in a while that I just devoured in like a week. Just read it through real quick because it was real entertaining, good story, and well written. Welcome in, fam. Much love, Trav here. Back with a book review. I still am reading, not to the same extent that I was 2015, 2016, and 2017. The past year, it's been more like one book a month, or 1 to 2 books a month. Or I wouldn't finish books. I'm reading like educational stuff on farming, not stories. So this one, The Dirty Life, I'm gonna talk about it because it's great, and I want to share it with you. And I want recommendations as well on other similar books, which I'm gonna talk about. But I'm working on my project, The Food Life. So seeing this, I was like, all right, I have to read this. And I have a feeling that for every book that I write, I need to read at least 30 books, something like that. And I keep pushing my book back. Like, I need to read this other book first, see if it changes my perspective, take into account adjustments and edit it. And this book did change my perspective in a little bit. And one of those things that changed my perspective is, so I hear a lot of stories about people who are dissatisfied with their life in the cities and are like, fuck this, I'm gonna go back to the farming, I'm going back to the land. And that's a common story. It's becoming more common. Her story, Kristen Kimball, is I love my life in the city. I have an awesome job in the city. I like New York City. I like the bars. I like the casual. I like the anonymity. I like being able to start fresh. But the farm life is even more compelling. So Kristen Kimball was a travel writer living in New York City. Was her previous job. She went down on assignment to write about organic farming, and she met a dude named Mark. They hit it off immediately. Within a year, they were engaged. They were starting off on 500 acres of land and farming with horses without tractor, trying to build a CSA program, community supported agriculture, serving ish. I think it was 30 in the first year, but up to 100 families, whole food diet, feeding them the greens they need, the beans they need, sugar, maple syrup, dairy, meat, chicken, cow, pork, flour, grains, and tomatoes, cucumber, that sort of a thing throughout the season. But here's someone who kind of changed my perspective a little bit. Like, I like the city. I enjoy this. I like being able to go and get to Chinatown at 2 a.m. and get some really tasty grub. But I even prefer this. I think it's more compelling, so that's awesome. And her story, she was a travel writer, which makes this book pretty well written. I find that a lot of similar stories, like agriculture adventure in general, someone who has a good story isn't necessarily a good writer. Right, you're not necessarily a good writer, but her job is I'm a travel writer, and then I'm writing a story about my travel adventure going back to the land. And I'm trying to do something similar. I identified my profession as a writer for most of the time before going to, writing paid my bills for the longest time before becoming a farmer. So I relate to that quite a bit. And her story, other stories, so it's in the genre of back to the land. And I prefer other recommendations on books like this, especially stories. A similar one to The Dirty Life, I'm sure she read The Good Life by Helen and Scott Nearing. The Good Life I also recommend. That's a couple dating back to Depression era times. They decided they were going to leave New York City, and they went to Vermont and farmed and built a life and community there. And they thought it was great. The Good Life, the Dirty Life. So a couple more interesting things that I found from this book. One is how they got the land, 500 acres. Well, you can only do that in certain areas, We're not going to get 500 acres very easily out here in Hawaii. And if you have 500 acres, it allows you to do a lot more animals. You need a lot of space to do animals. You can get about, in grazing, a cow per acre, 4 to 8 sheep per acre. So if with 500 acres you can do a lot. You can have horses instead of tractors because there's a lot of forage, there's a lot of cheap, a lot of pasture. So that's something to keep in mind. We only have on our plot out here like 16, 20 acres. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do too. It's enough for a little bit of animals, but not too many. So if you're in animal ag, you need a big plot. You can get those big plots, especially across the Midwest US, especially across the North. And what's interesting is like, okay, well, how can I afford that? Well, in their story, they decided they would do it before they found the land. And her husband, the male in the story, is like, we're gonna get it for free. And that sounds like, oh, that doesn't actually happen in reality, but it does, and it happens because, and I see this out here in the country, there's a lot of land that's owned but not stewarded. It's owned by an older person who doesn't have the money, energy, time, operation to run it, and they would love someone to work on the land, even for free, because if, say that I own 500 acres, I don't visit it as much as I thought, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy to make it work. I don't necessarily need the money to sell it, but it would be nice if someone were to improve the value of the land, live on the land, kind of guard it, and build it up, plant fruit trees, fix up the structures and so on. So that's what happened in their case. They met a landowner who was lacking stewards, so they got to start off doing it rent-free, lease-free, and later on, once they made a profit, they bought chunks of the land off him. So for those of you who are like, well, I want to do something like this, and this even happened recently, but this is not that unique a story. If you think I can't possibly afford that land, you may be able to get it for free. Because there's this large generation of older farmers who's aging out, and they don't necessarily have someone in their family to take it. And even if they did, when you pass, because of the estate tax, you have to pay like a pretty high value of the land on cash. So a lot of families lose their land that way, and they're just looking for someone to come in to steward it, someone. So if you're looking for land, it's not that hard to find. Well, it's hard to find, but it's possible. So that was a cool takeaway. I mentioned the a desire for a better life, and you can have a good life in the city, but another huge theme in this was not that their marriage was perfect or that's necessary to do it, but she felt that and especially as she left, the thing she missed the most was the work. It was challenging. There was on the farm, there's always things you can do. There's a list of things you want to do and things you have to do. There's a list of things to do and things you have time to do. So they just worked constantly, especially because they had to milk and care for all these animals. But ultimately she loved the work. She felt the work was a lot of the reward. The work was a lot of the pay. I'm inclined to agree. We're not doing it for money. We're giving up money to do it. We're doing it for lifestyle because we like to be outside. We like to be up and watch the sunrise, and outside watching the sunset over the mountains, and being around chickens, animals, and so on, and eating good food. That was another key, is during the busiest times, they're like, okay, we don't really have time. We don't have time. So when we get off work, we're gonna go get pizza because it's quick. And she and him were like, no, hang on. If we're gonna do this, we have to at least eat our food. Otherwise, it's not worth it, because that's a lot of the reason why we're doing this, is for good food. So they did it for the good food. That's another reason you eat extremely well. You don't need to dress it up that much. You don't need to be that good a chef or a cook. You just eat the ingredients and it's great. To me, those are the big themes and the important bits. And then the story is how they actually did it and pulled it off, and it's pretty well written. She has good vocabulary, wordplay, it's smooth. There's lots of stories in there. I find it a good read. And then other books, similar books, I mean, mine's not really going to be quite like it, but it's in the same genre. The Good Life is also in it. Those are all Back to the Land. If there's other Back to the Land books you could recommend, I want to read more, so drop them below. But other semi-similar books, Animal, Vegetable, Mineral by Barbara Kingsolver is pretty good. And there's other ones, but a lot of the time you get with the agriculture books, a lot of theory and politics and culture and debate, and I'm doing that too. But what I liked about this one, it was like pure story. So I made it, I read every word, I didn't skip around. So if you like this, check out the book. Let me know what you think. I'll be doing some more book reviews as I read more books. And stay tuned for my book, The Food Life. Is coming out sometime 2019. First quarter, possibly the next couple months. So pretty excited about that. And thank you all. I appreciate you. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments.